And the blue are people with high school diplomas, the young, under 25 with a high school diploma. The red is everybody else, whether they had a high school diploma and they were older, or they didn't have a high school diploma, they may have only had grade 9. This is everybody in the entire study. And this was the measures at baseline, post-test, and follow-up. So the 3 different measures. Every test time, people with a high school diploma scored lower than people who did not have a high school diploma. Every test time in every category, prose, numeracy, and document use. So that tells me our PEI school system is in trouble. Now again, this is not the entire population. Maybe if we had every high school graduate between the ages of 18 and 25, we would see something different. This population is definitely in trouble, and they're the population I get in my programs.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Just, okay, these people with high school diplomas, why are they in the program?
Because they maybe don't have the right credit. Maybe they didn't take Chemistry 621, or maybe their marks were so low and they've got to bring their mark up so they can get into a program.
Does it also include special needs students?
Nope.
No, it doesn't.
No. There are no special needs students in this study.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Was it predominantly one school that kept coming up?
I'm doing a study now to look at that. I have a theory. We do know anecdotally, we get feedback from faculty saying, if they come from this school, we know their mark is what it is. If they come from this school, there's no way. But we don't have empirical evidence around that.
So you're talking urban and rural too.
Yes, we're talking urban and rural as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it linked to learners' anxiety over taking an exam?
But it could be, but that would mean that consistently, the young with high school diploma consistently experience more anxiety than those people that didn't have a high school diploma. That doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it. Like if I've never gotten my high school diploma, and all of a sudden I'm back doing stuff,
It would be the other way around.
you think it would be the other way around.
But when you say they're in trouble, the education system in PEI, like, what do you attribute?
Well, I actually am not an expert on the school system PEI. I think there's a whole bunch of factors there. A lot of it to do with, and in fairness to the school system, we expect it to be everything to everybody. And I think a lot of our curriculum, a lot of our evaluation mechanisms, one of the things in Prince Edward Island is, well, you have standardized curriculum, you have no standardized evaluation systems. So.
Well, they're coming in at the younger grades now. Grade 3s, grade 6s.
Not
They're getting standardized testing.
Are they? PISA?
Yeah. Grade 3s and 6s.
But it's going to take a long time before it
Yeah.
influences our adult learners.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lori?
Audrey, did you, for that diploma, did you do any distinction about whether it was a
We
general
don't
bracket?
track that. We don't have it on our electronic forms. We just check off as high school diploma. That's the next thing we have to go back in and start tracking. Because we don't know if these were practical, general, or academic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Really point to.
They're not all one or the other. There's a mixture in there. So there was consistent gain with all categories, but, and the pros, notice even at the youth and high school diploma, there's actually a loss. So you can't tell me that after they spent 3 to 8 months in a classroom, they actually got worse at reading, you know. So I think there's a motivational factor there as well. The CLE scores correlated positively to baseline scores in GED and credit final marks. So we know that that correlation was there, but it was demonstrated differently. So the daily learning gain, we actually took it down to, okay, if we know they're here this long, what's the average, how much did they gain? We actually took it down to how much did they gain per day in either credits or in GED, and we factored it out by day and night. And from that, we actually went to hours in the program to post-intervention. Day students in the credit program took 191 hours, while night students took 76.47 hours. So it would appear that they got through faster, but you have to remember that was only 6 hours a week. So if you translate that into weeks, it's not that they got through faster, they were just there for less time. And the level students took the most time. Now remember I said they were the ones that had the most to go. And again, not rocket science, this is what we would expect. Well, when I started encountering pushback from the economists on, well, why would there be a difference and how long it took them, I had to actually go into the data and I actually had to plot. So what I pulled out, and this is a diagram that looks kind of crazy, but the pink The pink is their baseline scores in math when they came through the door. So what you see is this was the lowest to the highest. So that's the pink. So we put that in linear order. And then I dropped in the amount of time they spent. And then I dropped in a trend line. So the lower their scores, the longer they spent. Which again, as educators, we know this. But it's important to have the policymakers, the funding people, the stakeholders understand that. And it wasn't just enough to do it in GED, I had to do it in credit programs as well. So here I took the gain, and again, we have the pink that shows, and here we've got someone that only had about 5 or 6 points of gain, right up to 71 points of gain, plotted against the time they spent, and again, the more gain they got, the longer they were there. So the longer they stayed, the more they did. Yes, Laura.
So what you're talking about gains, you're talking about their rise or whatever in point score on the CLE.
This actually was credit marks. This was actually credit marks.
When you were talking before about the youth who actually had some loss.
That was CLE.
Was CLE. Was there any thought at all about how appropriate CLE would be depending on the age of the person?
Well, it's used as a standardized test with IELTS, so that's already.
Because I wonder sometimes about the types of topics that they're asked to respond
Okay.
to about, say a youth, say they're in their late teens or early 20s, if it's information that they have much knowledge
Have you ever
about.
written the CLE? Yeah. When I did it, I didn't notice an age differentiation, but then I'm not on 225, obviously. But it seemed to be very
I
practical.
wonder about that with the social studies exam and the GED.
Possible.
Tends to be that the younger the people are who are writing, the worse they do, because they don't have
But
same
the
sort
other,
of
the other
information.
piece of it is that that result mirrors what we're hearing from faculty around the ability of post-secondary students to function in the post-secondary environment, that they're not coming in with the foundation skills. So,
No, that was just a question.
no,
I had
and that's the kind of
CLE
thing,
myself.
ETS is the person that, the organization that designed it, they're the specialists in standardized testing, so I would assume that they've looked at the age value.
Because, yeah.
So now let's look at the cost of learning gain. But this was one of the key things we wanted to look at. The highest cost was for the learning gain in credits at $28.50 per point per day for the learning gain in the credit day program. The lowest cost was $1 per point per day for reading in the night GED program. So we broke it out by whatever they took, however long it took them, and what was the actual cost based on our actual budget figures. That's what the economists have to hear. Now that we know the cost of it, let's look at the outcomes. What happened in terms of the work? And they're tied to the labor force. And this is where I was so pleased with the results we got here. It started at baseline. We had a high percentage of people in sales and service, trades, transport, heavy equipment. Now, sales and service on Prince Edward Island is your low end of the socioeconomic scale. You know, those are your people getting the minimum wage. We had very few in the other category. However, at post-test, we found there was a lot of diversification, especially from sales and service. So they had moved from the lower end. Now, a lot moved to other, and we're not 100% sure what the other was. So we're still a little bit vague about that. But we do know that they moved from the lower end of the economic scale. We didn't see a lot of movement in some of the other categories, significant movement for women. And we're really pleased with what happened with their salaries, because there was a significant difference in salaries at baseline. It amounted to $2.74, statistically significant. There was no statistically significant difference in earnings at post-intervention. So once the learning intervention had occurred, it did change their status, their employment outcomes. And this is actually, you'll find this in some other studies that HRSDC was doing at the time. So it is showing that adult upgrading is definitely having a positive influence on female salaries. It might not be having as much of an influence on male salaries. Their understanding of the need to continue learning. This was so exciting to see this. 91 to 95% of learners see education as a way to manage life better. So they understand education is important. And even when we broke it down by ages, there really wasn't a lot of difference. I mean, you might see a few percentage differences there, but there was nothing statistically significant. So every age, every learner, they knew, no, it's a way to make your life better. They also believe learning gives you more self-confidence, and that was the one I was so pleased to see. And for those of us working in this field, it's all about the self-confidence. It's all about them having the belief in themselves to keep going, to do something more. So we have 92 to 97%. Yes, learning does give me more self-confidence. So these were our attitudes after they had the intervention. And we had done this as well before. I don't have the improvement in here. I don't think there was a big change and increase in the positives. They were very positive to begin with. But that's important. It's important to know that people understand how important this is. Again, another outcome, did we transition them to post-secondary? 57% of students from the credit programs applied, which is great. I'd like to see that number a whole lot higher. I'd like to see it around 80, 90%. And the ratio of applications to acceptance was 3 to 1, which was similar to our high school group. Now at Holland College, we do have a special section of seats reserved for adult ed students, 20% of the seats. So they compete within that pool. They have to meet the minimum standards. They can't get in just because they get in, but they compete in a separate pool. So we compared the pool with a high school competition to ours, and it was pretty well the same. And that's good. That tells me these learners are feeling as positive about going on to post-secondary as our high school learners are. Now, we're not getting as many applying as we should, but you also have to remember that oftentimes GED is not, it's accepted, but they have to have additional things on top of it to get into programs. It's not in and of itself the only thing. So the factors which positively linked performance and learning gains, the learner factors, the ones we attributed to learners, age, older learners were more likely to complete. And I did another study while I was in Ottawa of what the performance was like in comparison, older and younger. It was GED and high school. And older learners, I did a distribution curve, and that's sort of your bell curves. The younger learners were down here, and it seemed like for every 10 years you did in population demographics, it moved over 2 and 3 points, which, hooray, the older learners are doing good. And guess where the peak was, where they were doing the best? What age range? Anyone got one guess?
Plus 40.
46 to 54. So, hooray. For those naysayers that say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, hey, that is wrong. The higher scores in their literacy certainly translated into better performance, better completion. Learners without a high school diploma had better learning gain than learners with a high school diploma, and this was their actual credit marks. Learners in the lowest quartile of the CLE scores, if you divided it evenly, they had the greatest gains than other quartiles, and that makes sense. They had the most to gain, so they gained the most. The program factors that influence this are rural sites, so we have to kind of mirror our best practices in our rural sites. And the day program, of course, the intensity. If you're there 30 hours a week, it's going to be better than 6 hours a week. But all other factors were consistent across our sites, across our programs, across our instructors, which tells me that we're maintaining the standards across our instructional staff, which is really important. The learning costs increased with more complex programs. Now, I did a little bit of projecting. You're going to see that in the next couple of slides. And this was for the benefit of the policymakers in our province. So I said, if you had learners that needed to come back and they needed to gain 20 points in credits in order to get in, maybe their averages were 55 and they needed to have 75 to get into programs. Well, if they were going to come in, they have 20 points they have to gain at $28.90 per day, $578 is what it's going to cost.
You wordless and speak honest.
If they only needed to get 10 points, $289, which, given for women, we're going to equalize their learning, or equalize their salaries and things like that. Pretty good return on investment. Employment shifted from low-wage sectors, again, return on investment. Difference in earnings between males and females, no longer statistically significant, still not as high as we'd like to see it, but it's not a statistically significant difference. Learner attitudes are very positive. They really believe in learning and giving you more self-confidence. They're going on, they're transitioning to post-secondary.